Yeah, I really appreciate it.
Yeah, I'm always worried about the time difference that I got it right.
Oh no, no, it's perfect. It's perfect. I'll tell you the hardest time difference though. It's Australia. Like America and South Africa are completely fine. Like that's not a problem.
Yeah. I wonder what's the time difference for Australia and South Africa?
I actually don't know. I've got a lot of family in Australia. I'm sure that like being born in South Africa. I don't know how much of your family is still left in South Africa, but the amount of South
Uh,
Africans that flock to Australia is crazy. It's just a bunch of like ex-South Africans over there.
yeah, we're the only Tollemaches from our family that moved to America, but mo all of them moved to Australia.
That's wild. That's crazy.
Yeah.
I've got a bunch of family that's now in California. So during the days of apartheid, my great uncle, he used to sneak into the townships and he used to go and teach people in the townships. And then the secret police was after him. So him and his wife packed up their bags, they moved to Australia, and then an opportunity opened up in California. And then he moved to San Francisco. He landed, yeah, and then they've been living there ever since.
Yeah, I think there are a lot of South Africans that live in California. We were gonna move there, but then it was too expensive. But we moved to we were in Texas and we are gonna move to South Africa, but or to California, but it was too expensive. But I think the weather is very similar to South African weather, or at
It
least
is.
like yeah, because it makes sense because they both have wine.
Yeah. Yeah. And I'll tell you the thing is that a real South African winter is not a winter at all. Like you compare it to New York, it's like spring. So I lived in
Yeah,
Vermont for about like 6 months and I was like, this is a real winter. Like you don't want to go outside. It's like minus 25 degrees Celsius outside, which I don't know what that is in Fahrenheit. Never ever bothered to learn it.
I don't know, same here, but no, it's like Texas is the same way. Like my mom is thinking about moving. She likes to retire in West Texas, and the reason why she wants to, it reminds her of where her mom retired to in South Africa, in the I think the Transvaal Mountains or something.
Yeah.
New Bethesda is where my grandmother retired to.
Oh, that's
And that's what
crazy.
it feels like that out in West Texas. It feels like Africa out there.
Oh, that's crazy. So is there like a big South African community in Texas? What was kind of the incentive to move to Texas?
I don't know. I don't think there is like that big of a South African community in Texas, but you do find them. There are a lot. There was one in the town that I grew up in outside of Houston, but I think for some reason, I think we had a lot of South African doctors in Houston because there's a big medical facility here, or at least Houston is known for their medical facility.
Oh, that's crazy. That's insane. So is that how you got to America?
Uh, I know my parents wanted to move out of South Africa, and there was a job opportunity for my dad through his biz company to move out to Texas, and that's why he did. But then I also think my dad romanticized Texas. He grew up listening to westerns on the radio, and he loved country music, and I think him moving out here was like, I don't know, felt like moving to the West or something.
But that's the funniest thing about growing up up outside of America. By the way, what age did you move like from South Africa to America?
I don't think I was even a year old. It may have been 78, probably 79, but before the full year, because I was born in 78. Um, it's like when people ask me about South Africa, I'm like, honestly, I don't identify. I identify only with my parents being non-Americans, but I probably more relate to the American side than I do to being like from South Africa.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So I mean, like that's the strange thing. So like growing up, I was lucky enough to go visit like my cousins in America very often, and I've got quite a big friend base in New York. But there really is that kind of romanticized sort of a picture of America when you're living outside of America. So you see it as like that land of opportunity and everything. But I mean, obviously, like within the Trump era and just kind of what's going on in America now, everyone's like, oh damn, like it's crazy what America used to be and now what it is now. And it's like there's so much uncertainty with regards to the future of America.
Yeah, I feel like definitely things are hard. I would think that it's harder to have a rags to riches story here that instead of how it was maybe 30, or not even 30, probably like 30, 40 years ago, before, like
Yeah.
right around when we came here. Like I think you could still move here in the 80s and still have the the American dream to an aspect. I definitely feel like, you know, being probably white or like in middle class helps you out a lot more in America than, like I think if you're like, I grew up in Texas and I felt like anytime anybody like Hispanic moved over to Texas, we got a huge Hispanic population, not just Mexicans, but it was
Yeah.
also El Salvadorians. And I think that first generation for them, it's like they made sacrifices, and then the second generation is where you could benefit and like start making a life for yourself. But the first generation has a harder time, I think, for sure.
Yeah, but I think that's really just anywhere in America. But I mean, certain places are just like so expensive. Like New York is like crazy. By the way,
It's
how did,
crazy.
yeah, I mean, do you live in New York or do you live in like Texas?
I live in New York, so I live in a suburb, or like a what you would consider a borough. It's called Queens, but then like a smaller area of Queens called Astoria that a lot of stand-up comics live in because it's really close to the airport.
Oh, okay, that's crazy. So, I mean, obviously, did you start comedy when you were in Texas?
Yeah, that's where I was laid the foundation, definitely in Texas and Houston.
Oh, that's crazy. So, I mean, was there like a big comic scene when you were actually starting off over there?
Yeah, I would consider at the time, I mean, it was probably a little leftover of the big comedy boom from the 80s, 70s and 80s. So we had maybe 3 or 4 clubs. And I think even prior, before I started, there were a lot more clubs, but they started dwindling. And then as I started, the clubs started getting like, couldn't pull in the money that they were, or they couldn't sustain the rent that they had to pay. So then it died down a little bit. But then when I left for New York, what I found out from Houston, it sounded like there were all these offshoots, like independent shows that were happening. So instead of having like one show a week at the one main place, this started being like tons of satellite shows. So it became a different kind of scene, which is good too in itself.
That's pretty crazy. I'm kind of wondering what's going to happen, like, especially with Joe Rogan and a bunch of those guys like moving to Texas. Do you think that there might be like another or like a bigger comedy boom that takes place in Texas?
Yeah, I don't, that's what I was wondering because for a lot of comics, it's not going to be as easy to get to like Joe Rogan's show. And I don't think he pays his guests. So there's not like an incentive. So I feel, but I mean, you do get exposure. So that's one thing. But so if you have money, then it's like you could easily go down there. It is going to be interesting because I've heard that there's a lot of comics that have moved out of LA and are moving to like, I think from what I heard, this is not from my like, do don't confirm it with me, but like Theo Vaughn might be moving to Tennessee, Rogan's in LA or Austin, and then I think Joey Coco Diaz is moving to New Jersey. Not that that's the whole scene, but
Yeah,
that's a lot of big names coming out, moving out of LA right now.
yeah,
And also a lot of comics left New York.
yeah. So I mean, that's the craziest thing. And even if you look at it from an even bigger spectrum, like what happened with Dave Chappelle, like just performing in Ohio, and I mean, he made that work. So I don't think that you necessarily need New York as much. So it's to an extent it's kind of concerning, and to another extent it's kind of cool just to see, like comedy taking place in all these different areas.
Oh, I mean, I think all of it, I mean, I love history and I find stuff fascinating why things end up being the way that they are. And like, I had this conversation yesterday talking about if we had portals where you could just be beamed to another location within 5 minutes, do you think people would be living in these huge cities, or like would you start moving to places that wherever you wanted, and how would that change the scene? And I guess that can be pertained to like what's happening in stand up right now. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, it definitely could change. I think a lot of comics, if you looked at the variety comics to watch list, a lot of them weren't stand ups. They were content creators that are doing stuff from their own apartment. So you don't really need to live in the big cities to do that.
Yeah. That's like Sarah Cooper, like what she did. I mean, she's getting a Netflix special.
Yeah. Yeah, but she, to be honest to her, like a lot of people were like, where did she come from? But she had been around for a while working the scene. And then I guess during pandemic, taking advantage of TikTok and the lip sync feature and then doing Trump speeches and putting them in different locations, that blew her up. That it just shows you that like you can make things happen on your own terms. And I thought that it was quite inspiring for that to happen to someone like Sarah Cooper.
But it's so crazy how the pandemic has almost like initiated this new sort of like different forms of comedy almost. So, I mean, you've got Zoom comedy, which feels like it's a completely new form of comedy altogether. Because the thing is you got a whole bunch of comics who are coming onto Zoom, and I mean, they're actually performing on Zoom, and then they bomb, but they're like these established comics. And then you've got other people that are doing like all the stuff on TikTok, and they're just killing it on TikTok. So it's crazy to just see the various directions that comedy, is going.
Oh, yeah. I mean, I love it. I feel like now there's not just one avenue and you're not held to within, I call them gatekeepers. Like you have opportunities now to make things on your own. Like you don't need people to be like, yes, you're the next big thing. It's like up to you. So I love that. I love that now all these comics are putting stuff on their YouTube channel and you don't need Netflix to get pushed out and have people see your comedy. Like a lot more people can see it if for you, like you can do it on your own.
Yeah, exactly. Like someone, for instance, like Tim Dillon, like I always thought his comedy was very funny, but as an actual content creator, as somebody who's like making videos and things, I think that he's brilliant at that. Like I'd love to see him
Yeah.
have a sketch comedy show as a result of this. And I've only really seen
Oh
his
yeah.
videos.
Like another one is Kyle Dunnigan. He on Instagram. Like he's one of my favorite people that I'm like, this is way better than anything that like SNL has produced in a long time.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. Do you think, by the way, so as somebody who's obviously performed a lot, like on all these different late night shows, do you think that late night still holds the same weight that it did like a couple of years ago? Things like Saturday Night Live and like The Late Show and like The Tonight Show.
Um, yeah, well, I think shows like SNL are great. There'll still be like great launchers of careers, but like I don't know, late night, you can have a full career without ever doing late night. And late night's just like something that makes you feel good as a comic and it's nice. And it's also a good thing, like once you get that clip and comedy clubs have something to promote you with where and not looks like a thing to the general public. They're like, oh, this person must be great because they have this great clip on a network TV. But in the scheme of things, like it doesn't launch your career as much as say like I would say like a TikTok or being well known on Instagram.
Yeah, yeah. Because one of the things that is really like, I don't know, like I've always found very interesting is that when it comes to late nights and comedians obviously putting their stuff out, apparently what the producers do is they'll literally go through your entire set and they'll highlight and they'll go, this can't go in, this can't go in, this can go in, tweak this name, you can't use the word Starbucks. So, like, how does the whole thing work? Do you not feel like it kind of constrains your comedy?
Yeah, it's awful. It's, I mean, once you get it on air and they approve your set, like that's great. But honestly, to get a good 5 minutes is, especially in the beginning, once you're established and you've been on a few late nights and have like a repertoire with some of the bookers, then they'll let you do jokes probably or that they wouldn't have approved in the first few sets. But like that first 5 minutes getting a tape, it is a constant back and forth that is very frustrating. And it can, for a lot of comics, you kind of just can give up with it because you're like, it's been a year and we're still working on my 5 minutes. This is crazy.
Yeah, that's insane. So do you kind of feel like, when you first go and perform on stage and you need that tight five, do you kind of feel like you're going back to that open mic stage where you kind of have to like kind of cram your set and make it super short and like, kind of just get it out there?
Yeah, there's definitely, I know when, for a lot of the two late nights that I've done, I feel like I've dropped tags on jokes. First of all, some of those tags are probably too dark or too blue for TV. And then also it ends up being kind of unnecessary for that 5 minutes that you're like, that's just something that you could do to have fun when you're doing a longer set. But yeah, 5 minutes, I'd say keep it tight.
Yeah. So would you say, obviously, as a result of like late nights, do you think that you kind of felt almost like this career boost?
Um, well, it helps for stuff like if you get a late night, I think that can help you get into Montreal new faces, then that can help you get seen by management or agents. But even doing like new faces, that doesn't even do it. Like there's tons of people that haven't done new faces that have really amazing careers. Um, I don't think I actually really don't feel like late night does much anymore as it used to. It's just something that makes you feel good and you it's like getting a really great clip to put online to get likes and retweets the next day. It's like having a birthday. That's what it feels like. It feels like an accomplishment, but like in the scheme of things, it's not the thing. It'll never be the thing that explodes you anymore, I think.
Yeah. Because I mean, if you look back at it, like with Johnny Carson, you always used to hear stories of Johnny Carson, like Eddie Murphy would go on Johnny Carson, and then he would just blow up afterwards. It's like your career's made. But like with late night now, you'll get exposure. And I think that you'll get a couple more fans, but I don't know if it'll necessarily like just launch you into stardom like it used to.
No, I sometimes feel like having a viral video does more for your career than doing late night. Like it, because I feel like a lot of people don't watch as much TV as they used to. I know I had a friend that he was one of the writers on Parks and Rec, and he said the show Roseanne back in the day in the 80s and 90s, if she had the numbers, the highest numbers that Roseanne would have been canceled. So it just shows you that people aren't there's so much media and avenues and streaming services that everything is splintered now, and I think most people are watching stuff online than they are on TV.
Yeah, that's very true. So then when it comes to like, let's just say for instance, how did you get discovered for like the seller? So how did like SD find you?
Well, that one, I think this Comedy Central was starting to tape a show called Week at the Cellar, and they had a list of names of people that they wanted to get, or you had to get passed first through the cellar. So I got through there, but I also had like some recommendations. Usually for the cellar, you get recommendations from other comics, and that's from them just seeing you on a consistent basis doing a consistently good job. And then it's also a lot of it is like, are you someone that people want to hang out with too? Like,
Yeah.
because you're at the seller table, is it a thing that people like your company? I think that has a lot to do with it, and that's just like any other job that you would get, not even comedy. It's like, are you a like easy to get along person?
Yeah. So do you think that's actually something that would make somebody get past at the seller? So it's like this person can crush, but they just can't like interact at that back table.
Yeah, I
That's
think
crazy.
I think that has an aspect. I mean, unless you're at such a huge caliber of a comic that you don't need to worry about that, then I then it probably doesn't matter. But I think it's just like any job that you have to be like, I don't know, easy to work with.
Yeah, 100%. So then what made you actually want to go into comedy? Was it always something that you wanted to do?
Yeah, I I remember I watched lots of specials growing up, and I still do, and I still really enjoy comedy. I think actually I'm just more like a comedy nerd. And I thought it, even if it wasn't something that I thought was like making me laugh out loud, I thought it was just more fascinating to listen to people's life stories and perspective and their point of view. And then um yeah, I just really like jokes, and I remember just like remembering the jokes that I like from some of the specials or like SNL sketches, and then you repeat it at the table, the lunch table the next day, and you're like, I really like how this feels. And then I feel like then all of a sudden, like your mind kind of starts thinking that way. It becomes your obsession. And that's how it was. Like it was always, I think obsessively, I'd always try to think of a funny angle for stuff. And then, yeah, as soon as then I got after high school, as soon as I got the courage to go up and find an open mic, then it was just game on after that.
So my whole thing is like very similar. So I mean, like I did one open mic when I was like in grade 9, bombed terribly. I used
Yeah.
a bunch of Jimmy Carr jokes. The reason I fell in love with comedy was like, so my parents, when I was very young, they took me to this comedian. His name was Nick Rabinovitz. He was the #1 Jewish Xhosa speaking comedian in South Africa. And I was 11 years old, and they took me to the front row, and they just started like, this comedian just started like digging into me. But the craziest thing was, it was like a conductor at an orchestra, and it was crazy that he was able to make like an audience laugh like that and kind of provide all these different perspectives that you just wouldn't have thought of. And I was like, this is a career, this is crazy. So it's wild. And I mean, currently the scene in South Africa is very small still. It's growing.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, except I feel like a lot of there. I forgot who I was doing lockdown comedy. I was like, wow, it sounds like South Africa is getting really into comedy and having your own scene kind of come out of all of this.
Yeah. Yeah. So I mean, we've got like 2 comedy clubs in like, I think it's Joburg, and then 1 comedy club in Cape Town. And the amazing thing about our comedy scene is obviously like in the new democratic South Africa, a new form of comedy had to obviously be formed. And as a result of that comedy, comedians had to appeal to audiences that were coming from the townships. You know that there's obviously 11 official languages in South Africa, and just
Yeah.
kind of just appeal to everyone. So these comedians had to become literally the most relatable people. So then that's why you get a guy like Trevor Noah who goes to America and then just like crushes it.
Yeah, I would feel like you guys have like a more diversity than we do in a weird way. And because you guys have a lot of cultures in one area. Like I just listened to my parents' story, like I would hear about a Portuguese settlement, a Jewish settlement, there's like townships, then you've got the like tribal and then the 11 languages, and you're just like that's just a lot of different perspectives in one area. So it's just really fascinating to see that come through that I would feel like a show there would be really fun to watching to see all the different kinds of backgrounds that you guys have there.
Yeah, it's very interesting to kind of see just like all the different types of like cultures that we have over here. But yeah, it's really amazing the type of comedy scene that we also have over here. By the way, so when it comes to your special Voluptuous Boy, how long did it actually take to craft that material?
Well, that was kind of like jokes from the last 5 years that I liked. I was like, these are what I like, and so it's kind of like the best of from that moment. And then actually putting it all together to figure out a cohesive way that I could remember it. Um, that probably started in October, and then just slowly, doing spots like working 4 different 15-minute material. And then, yeah, just working on that for like 4 months prior to taping it. So I would have it down pat. Because I feel like, I don't know, you want to be prepared. That way, when things happen, you feel comfortable that you know that you can like deal with whatever happens in the room and then come back to your material rather than like if you get sidetracked or something and then you're like, shit, where am I? I just like it just makes me feel more comfortable.
Yeah. So when you use jokes from like 5 years ago, obviously you're a much better comic, like as the years go on. Do you take those jokes from like 5 years ago and then just start like rewriting them or tweaking them? Or is it like this was great in the moment and it could still like, work now?
Yeah, I mean, I always joke that a lot of times like I'll write a joke now and then tag it 3 years later. It's just like sometimes you forget about it and then you remember, you're like, oh yeah, I forgot about that bit and I really liked it. And then you bring it back and then you're doing it on stage again for the first time in a year. And then you're just like, oh, I could go this route with it. And then you start adding on to it again. Like, I don't know. Sometimes it's good to walk away from a bit and then come back to it, especially something that you liked that wasn't doing well, and then just be like, you know what, I really like that bit. I should revisit it and see if I can make it work again.
Yeah. One of the things that actually fascinates me like quite a lot when it comes to the New York scene, for instance, it's a very like there's so many different comics over there and so many different comedy clubs. Do you kind of know if a certain joke will work at a certain comedy club? Or is it just a thing of like it's New York, jokes are jokes, whatever's funny is funny?
Yeah, I think there's two kinds of rooms. So there's just like your club rooms and what I would consider your Brooklyn scene, which, and I only say Brooklyn scene, and it doesn't need to be like just in Brooklyn, but like those crowds, if it's not in a club show, for some reason, they trust you a little bit more and will let you breathe in a joke. So you can kind of do some of your weirder, more like weirder thoughts that you have. And I think those can be really fun. And then at the club scene, you're dealing with like more of a general public that I feel like that paid a lot of money and have a 2 drink minimum, that if you're not coming out of the gate strong, you can lose them. And that can be quite frustrating and kind of take away the fun of doing stand up. But I do think that you need both of those rooms, like to do well in both, because both make you strong. Like you don't want to just do the club rooms, because I feel like you end up getting like uh, bad habits and you cater to the lowest common denominator in club rooms. But if you only do Brooklyn rooms, a lot of the times you can become so like weird and acerbic or whatever that it's a lot of work for people to like pay attention to, that you're not working on your timing in the Brooklyn rooms. That I feel like you need both. You need the Brooklyn rooms to be original, and then you need the club rooms to help you on your timing. So I think they're both good scenes to like dip your toes in to get good.
So essentially, the one is like to actually solidify your material and to kind of make it perfect. And then the other one is just like,
Sculpture.
let me just be a little bit more experimental with it.
Yeah, I like going to the Brooklyn, or like what I would consider the Brooklyn rooms. They're just alt rooms, I guess is what you would consider it, or bar or coffee shop. And the stakes feel lower. There's not like a booker in that room making me like, you have to hit your mark or I'm not going to book you on these paid spots. The Brooklyn shows are usually free, or they're free shows. So you're like, well, if no, I'm not getting paid for this, I'm going to do whatever I want. So that allows you to have moments to breathe and like really work on some really different stuff. That's just for me, my personal experience. I think when you're a bigger comic like Dave Chappelle, it doesn't matter because they're gonna have you no matter what. So then you have the ability to breathe in those club rooms. So that works for a lot of those guys. But
Absolutely.
yeah, I definitely feel like, I think in a club room, it's like you have this big clay in the Brooklyn rooms that you really like, and then you bring it to the club rooms and you start shaving it off and like really tightening it. And that's where I think that it becomes like a jewel there. I don't know.
Have you ever had like an experience where you go to one of these types of like Brooklyn rooms and you try something that you've never tried on stage before, and then you almost like perfect it to the T, like it's already like it almost feels like it's already refined, like you don't need to, tweak it at all.
Oh yeah. I mean, there's times where I've done, you do like 2 or 3 sets in one night, and I've done almost like the same set in Brooklyn and it did really well there. And I was like, okay, I think I could do this at the Cellar. And then you do it at the Cellar and then it just eats a dick. And then you're like, what happened? I don't get why 2 different groups of people are having 2 different experiences right now with this material.
Yeah.
It's very frustrating. I don't like that. It makes me like, oh, I just want to go back to the Brooklyn rooms.
But isn't it fun like performing at the Cellar, like knowing like that you crushed it at the Cellar and it's like such an iconic place in New York?
Yeah, I mean, you feel like you're part of a scene. It's great, and then you're in the top 1% with stand up. It feels like, so you feel like you're. I don't know, that you've arrived. I think when you're at the Cellar.
Do you remember your first day of like going to that back table at the Cellar and obviously interacting like with, the best comics, and then you becoming one of the best comics like in the New York scene, like entering that elite?
Yeah, it's definitely nerve-wracking because there were times that you would go and hang out with your friend that was past there and that you're sitting in the back table and you know everybody, but then like say like it really kind of like can hit like an old nerve or like make you feel like you're back in high school in a little bit because then it's like someone like Chris Rock or Dave Chappelle comes and then you feel like you've got to like move your tray of food and move to a different table because there is like it is a certain hierarchy and then you're like I'm not even past here but I was sitting here and I know people here but I feel like I have to move because they're like the top dog here. And you do, it's fine. That's what it is. There is just like a natural hierarchy with stuff.
Absolutely. Like I kind of felt that when like obviously starting to speak to seller comics like over this podcast, I would kind of almost feel like I'd have to like force funny and then you just like bomb. And it's like I bombed in front of a seller comic. I'm never gonna make it. This is terrible.
No, we bomb all the time in that back table, so it's fine.
Do people like then like shit on you? Is it a thing like where it's like you'll tell a joke and then everyone's just like, no, that's not funny.
Yeah, you have that. You have that when you do a lot of their podcasts and then you get used to it and then you do it to them. They have jokes that bomb too, so
Yeah, 100%.
yeah.
So so then obviously, you know, like you and Joe List, who's your husband, you guys did the roast battle show together. That's actually where I found out that you were South African because I think it was Jeff Ross made a joke or something about it. It's
Yeah.
quite a strange dynamic to like actually roast your husband.
Yeah, you know, it was one of we had a really great time and a lot of people were like, "Was that weird? Did that kind of like put a dent in your relationship?" And you were like, "Of all the things that we've ever done, that has not crossed our mind as one thing that's ever built up resentment between us. We had a really great time. We it was like I think what a lot of people don't understand when you do a roast, it's supposed to be done with somebody that you love. It's like with a friend. And I think those are the best ones. And those people know exactly what they can and cannot make fun of. And when you know each other in your comics, you let them make fun of whatever. So we wrote a lot of the jokes together and we also had our friends join in. So it was a joint effort when we did the roast battle. We knew exactly I was like, I know how people perceive me this way. You're totally allowed to make jokes about this and this. And he was the same way. Like he's kind of an open book policy too. Like he always talks about anything and everything on podcasts. So I knew all the stuff that I could make fun of.
But don't you find it like a little bit harder? Like obviously, you know, roasting the ones that you love. Like, isn't that a little bit harder than people that you don't know? Because it's so easy to shit on people that you don't know. But then the people that you know, it almost like touches a nerve, doesn't it?
I guess I just feel like because sometimes I've seen roasts that they do and they don't like each other and it kind of gets like weird and awkward and then that person starts taking it personally and then it makes everyone feel uncomfortable and sad in a weird way where I feel like part of the roast is supposed to be like there's a love to it.
Yeah. Yeah. So was there anything that was kind of just like off limits for you guys where it's like, you can't say this, you can't say this?
No, I don't think there was anything that was off limits. I don't there's not one thing that I would be like why, you know, I don't know why you would bring up. I guess anything very personal that our family didn't know about, that would be probably off limits. Because that's a public forum that you're like, uh, that would be something really disturbing if my family was hearing something for the first time. But both of our families knew all of our information.
Absolutely. So obviously, like the first thing that comes to mind is, did you ever watch that show Crashing
Yeah, with Pete Holmes.
with Pete Holmes? And you know, there's that one scene where I think that Pete Holmes and his girlfriend are like roasting each other, and then they walk out like the room and they have this big fight based on the roast. So that's just like, wow, I just thought of that.
Well, I think with that one is that they weren't beforehand. Wasn't he just kind of thrown up there last minute?
Yeah.
Yeah, so they didn't work on stuff together. So she was getting blindsided by stuff, and he was getting blindsided with stuff. And some people are like, I mean, this happens all the time. Even when I've been with comics that they're all like, oh, I thought we were busting balls, and then somebody kind of takes it too far, or they're like the new person in the group, and you're like, you haven't established that relationship yet. I don't know who you are, so it's weird for you to bust my balls when I don't know you.
The funniest thing I think that I've ever seen, like in terms of that like comic dynamic, and it's especially I had I think it was three seller comics on last Sunday. It was Mike Cannon, Will Sylvans, and Keith Robinson, and everyone kept calling Keith Strokey Robinson, and Keith was just there like dying, and like it's so crazy to just kind of see that sort of a dynamic. Is there anything that's kind of like off limits for you as a comic, like just as a whole?
No, I don't think so. I think what this is what I've determined. I've seen this one. Somebody did a roast joke about somebody having bad breath and they didn't know that they had bad breath. And I think that was really sad for them to find out that they had bad breath in a public forum. I think something like that, if it was something that I was not like aware of what I was doing, like foul body odor or bad breath, then like that would be like, oh my God, I've been going around my whole entire life with bad breath and no one's been telling me. Like, this is really shocking. I think that would be something that I would consider upsetting, but anything else, no.
So is it almost like, do you guys like share the jokes beforehand, or is it just completely
Yeah,
unexpected?
no, we shared the jokes before and then like kind of wrote them together. Cause it's like, I don't know, I'm into self-deprecating humor, so
Yeah,
of course I would, if I could write a joke about myself or like have Joe tell it, then that's great. And then, I mean, we had some of his friends and my friends help out as well. Um, Also, here's the thing too, and this is why I really like roast. It's like, it's a last area or place that you can make off-color jokes or dark humor without offending anyone because both parties have signed up for it.
yeah,
So
100%.
if something's really dark or like upsetting, but the joke is killer, then it's like it's kind of forgivable in my side. So if somebody made a joke about me, but it's like such a great joke, then I think if I laugh from it, then I would kind of forget that it was hurtful.
But that's the amazing thing about comics is that I think that comics have just, like I would say most comics have just got very thick skin and they just have that ability, I think, just to kind of just like take it and kind of laugh at themselves. Like not everything, I don't think that people just take themselves so seriously.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just think of the people in your life. There's comics in real life that you just know not to bust balls with. And because you've just learned and you've been burned by, or like they've like lashed out and have done like, or been mean, or I mean, I just think of like, not comic wise, but people in my life, like I would never roast my mom, but I might be able to roast my dad. Like he was a little bit easier to like have fun with and that. Like people, just certain people have different kinds of humor, and you after a while, if you know them, you know like things not to do around them.
Absolutely. And I mean, especially also just during the pandemic, just in terms of you and Joe like writing each other's jokes, with comedians or being a comic, it's a very individualistic type of profession. And the only time you really get to interact with people in your profession is that sort of a back table type environment. Do you feel like having a husband as a comedian is quite helpful, during this time, like in terms of the pandemic?
Yeah, we haven't. I mean, a lot of people are always like, couples have broken up during pandemic, or have had like a really hard time. I think divorce rate is really high, but we've had a really great time um during it. I think a lot of it is like I help him do one thing and then he helps me do one thing. So we're supportive in that aspect. So that's been really, I think it's been really fun. Like we, instead of like, since we weren't able to go up as much, we were doing videos and like helping each other make each other videos or podcasts.
That's awesome. And then when it comes to actually writing material, do you write each other's like jokes or refine each other's jokes?
No, not really. I think he and I kind of have two different comedic sensibilities, and our writing process is quite different. I consider I like for me, like I need it feels like divine intervention when a joke comes to me. It's just like it just comes into my mind. Or like hanging out with friends or being in a scenario and then how I would deal with it, where he's like a guy that sits down with pen and paper and really hammers it out. And if it's like, for me, it's like, it has to feel like a joke. With him, it's like, here's a scenario, I'm going to write bits about it. And that's how I feel like he and I are quite different. So we don't help each other out in that aspect. But what does happen is like, I don't know, sometimes in conversation, he'll be like, that's a bit. And then I'll be like, that's really funny. I think you should like look into that or see what you can do with that. Cause that's just something different. And I feel like no one's talked about that.
That's awesome. That's very cool. So actually, I want to revert it back to the album now. How come comedians decide to do albums as opposed to like putting out like a special?
Well, I think that one is a lot easier. It's so cheap to do you can really DIY your own album. Like you just there's a lot of clubs that have their own recording and they can give you your sound files, and then either you can save up a little money and get somebody to professionally mix it, but you can do it yourself if you have a little bit of knowledge of doing audio files. And now that everything is digital, it's so easy to upload it to like SoundCloud or make it a thing that you can put on iTunes. Specials are harder. You got to tape it. You got to edit it. You got to have somebody know how to edit. That's quite a bit of money to upfront. Like Joe taped his own special, and I think it was like almost $20,000 out of his own pocket.
That's crazy.
I
That's a
know.
lot of money.
It is a lot of money, and he was fortunate that Comedy Central picked it up for their digital content, but even that, they didn't offer him that much, that I think he broke even with it. So, I mean, I think the next one, I even thought about, because setting up a camera, paying a camera guy. I think if you're connected, or like, once you're in the business, there's always tons of people on the satellite that are like, hey, I'll tape your special for this amount. And they have like, sometimes they're first time people that you could do it cheaper than what Joe did. And I know comics that have, but it's just a lot easier to do an album than it is to videotape a special.
Absolutely. Well, anyways, I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. This was a lot of fun. Thank you.
Yeah, I love talking about comedy.